So being able to have those conversations, I think on the continent is really beautiful because that's what Pan-Africanism is all about. And that's also what a lot of our ancestors fought for in the U.S. It wasn't us for just to be isolated in getting our rights and our freedoms. It was also about other folks being able to get it too. And just talking to folks in their countries and hearing their stories and their experiences, I think is always a good perspective to have, just because it's not a narrative I can get as easily over here.
This is the Maverick Show, where you'll meet today's most interesting location-independent entrepreneurs and world travelers, and learn the strategies and tactics they use to succeed. And now, here's your host, Matt Bowles.
Hey everybody, it's Matt Bowles. Welcome to the Maverick Show. This is part 2 of my interview with Sojourner White. If you have not yet listened to part 1, I highly recommend you go back and do that first, because it provides some really important context for this episode. If you have already heard part 1, then please enjoy the conclusion of my interview with Sojourner White. Well, one of the things that you and I have in common is that we share a deep love and appreciation for train travel. And I want to ask a little bit about how that love and appreciation developed for you. And I thought a good place to start would be with the California Zephyr. Can you share, for people that have never heard of the California Zephyr, they have no idea what it is, can you explain what it is, how you decided to take it, and what that experience was like and what it led to?
So the California Zephyr happened one night in February 2021 when I was in the pandemic. I need to get up out the house, but I don't want to go abroad because if I get COVID, I got to quarantine for 2 weeks. I don't have hotel for 2 weeks money. So let me figure out where I could go. So really the California Zephyr was born, or me taking the trip was born out of a Google search where I was like, U.S. bucket list. And I saw this train in the mountains. I'm like, what is Amtrak doing over here? I didn't know, because for me, I went from like Milwaukee to Chicago, an hour and a half. Or when I was in grad school, Milwaukee to St. Louis, like it was actually a mode of transportation, not a tourist thing. And I saw this train in the mountains. I'm like, what is it doing? Like, what is this? And I just go, and I'm seriously, it's kind of like now I have a glass of wine. It's like getting late and I'm just typing away, looking at vlogs. I'm like, what is happening? A train in the mountains? Like, how do I get on it? And I knew that Chicago's an Amtrak hub. So it's really easy for me to get on the trains anyway. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take this train. I haven't been anywhere in a year. And if I'm only going to do this once at the time, that's what I thought, I'm going to go all out. I'm going to get a room. If I get the room, I get the meals. That's easy. And I joke that I'm a traveling homebody because I love to travel, but I also love to be in my room. I love to be at home. I love to be comfortable. And when I saw the room, I'm like, I can get a room. I have my books, I can download some movies. I can have everything I want at home, but I'm on a train. I have the mountains next to me. I'm like, this is actually my jam. And so I booked the train ride. I'm like, okay, bet I'm going in July. And I didn't know then, but that also changed my Sojourneys career, because that was the start of the train travel queen. Like really was the start of it, because people were like, girl, get back on that train immediately. We want to see you on the train again. And I had no idea that it was going to be something, one, they wanted to see, because I had been creating content by that time from 2017. That was like 2021. So like 4 years. But like, again, I was in grad school. Like it wasn't like I wasn't doing it full time with the aspiration to do it full time. And so I was like, well, I kind of like the train. So yeah, I'll take another one and another one. And then next thing I know, I'm taking train trips multiple times a year. And that's how it was born. It really out of a Google search with some wine late at night.
That's how a lot of the best things happen. You know, I actually have a remarkably similar experience. So during the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, I had been probably doing about 85% of my podcast interviews in person, because I'm just traveling around the world full time. I'm meeting these amazing digital nomads and travelers, and I'm interviewing them over a bottle of wine in person. Then, of course, the pandemic happened, so 100% of the interviews are virtual. So I interview Nora Dunn. Shout out to Nora Dunn, the professional hobo. She's now been on the Maverick Show twice. And I interview her, and she has written a book about train travels, and she has done some of the most epic train journeys in the world. She's gone from Lisbon, Portugal to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, all by train in like a 30-day period. I mean, just like some of the most wild, epic, over-the-top train stuff ever. So I'm interviewing her about this on the podcast, and we're talking about our shared love for train travel. And for me, almost all of the train travel that I had done was international. I'm taking trains in Europe. I'm taking trains in Japan, this kind of stuff. And the only train travel experience that I had in the US, kind of like you were saying, was the short distance. For me, it was like the East Coast routes from like Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, to Philly, to New York. It was kind of like the Amtrak commuter train there. And until the pandemic, I wasn't even conscious or aware that they have trains where you have overnight cars and they serve you French toast and omelets in a dining car in the morning, and they do all this stuff in the US. I was like, really? We have that in the US? I didn't even know. And so there was an Amtrak sale on some of the long distance routes that I saw. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I had just interviewed Nora. Mind you, Nora and I had never met in person. We did a virtual interview. Okay. So I send her this thing and I'm like, hey, Nora, look at this. There's a sale on these long distance US train routes. What do you think? And it's a similar thing. First kind of trip post-pandemic, doing a domestic train trip instead of an international trip. Literally the same thing you just said. I'm like, check this out. There's a sale on these Amtrak train routes. Want to go on a train ride? And she replies and she goes, actually, yeah. Which of those routes were you thinking? So I had sent her like the route from Chicago to Seattle, the route from Seattle down to LA, and then the route from LA to New Orleans. And she goes, which of those were you thinking? And I was like, I was kind of thinking all of them. We just like start in Chicago, go to Seattle, then to LA, then to New Orleans. We'll just take a month and circumnavigate the US. And she's like, done. Let's do it. And I was like, cool. So literally having never met each other, we're like, yeah, let's commit to doing a 1-month train ride together. Sure. We'll meet in Chicago. We'll do this train ride. So we did it. And we circumnavigated the US on this super long distance train route. And then later we recorded a second podcast episode talking about this experience that we had on this train ride, which was super duper fun. But that really got me aware of what's actually available inside the United States that I had only associated with things outside the United States. But you have also done some train rides outside the United States, including some that I have not done that I have to ask you about. Can you explain to people that have never heard of the Jose Cuervo Express Tequila train in Mexico? What is that? And what was your experience like taking it?
So I first heard about the Jose Cuervo Express, I think on a TikTok or something. I think once I really got into train travel, I'm like, well, what are other trains like in this hemisphere? I'm like, where can I go in this hemisphere? And I saw it. And initially I'm like, oh, this will be a great like girls trip. But being late 20s, now I'm 30 as of last week, I was like, well, people have stuff going on. So I'm going to do it by myself. And earlier this year, I went to go work remote because, again, Mexico, Guadalajara, same time zone, not really a big deal. I'm like, okay, let me go take this train ride. And I don't know what I expected. Like I knew what to expect, but I didn't know what to expect. So they have a sunrise and sunset option. All my research said do the sunrise option, which meant that you'd be knocking back tequila shots at about 9 a.m.-ish, essentially. And I'm like, well, there's a good time for everything. So I was like, okay. So I booked the train ride. And of course, I do the most luxurious option because if I'm going to do this train once in my life, I'm going to do the elite one.
For sure.
Yes. I think at the time, this is their newest class of train. I think it was Diamond or something beforehand, but they have the elite car. So I go on the elite car. It's gorgeous. The service is great. I check in. They take my bags. I told them I'm staying in Tequila. So I also stayed in a Tequila Barrel hotel afterwards. So they were like, no worries. We'll hold on to your bag till the very end. I meet my car attendant and we all sit down. I'm the only solo traveler, I think. Again, it's like a bachelorette couples thing. And here I am in my really cute orange linen set I just got a few days ago. I'm about to enjoy this with like purple hair, about to enjoy this ride by myself. And so I'm just enjoying it. I'm listening to him. I speak Spanish and I can understand Mexican Spanish pretty well because it's most familiar to me. So I'm understanding what they're saying. I'm taking the shots. I'm taking the mixed drinks, and they give you some food, not as much as you think. So I would bring some snacks if I were to do it again, but they do give you some plates of food and you just kind of learn about the tequilas. And now, is Jose Cuervo my favorite tequila? No. Did I drink that Jose Cuervo? Yes, I did. Because I don't know, because I was on the train, it tasted better. I don't know what it was, but it was great. You like pass the agave fields, and the train ride is only 2 hours. So then it's a whole day of activity. So they get you drunk essentially in the morning because there's no way that you can counteract that at 9 a.m. So I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I think the vlog, you can kind of see my eyes going down as the vlog goes on, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm fine. I stand up. I'm not fine. I need water immediately. So then we kind of walk over. They give us water. They give us like a tour of the facility, Jose Cuervo Express facility, like how they make stuff, all of that. And I sit down, and across from me is another woman who me and her start talking again. When you have had tequila at 9 a.m., you're a bit friendlier than maybe you would be on other days. And so me and her start talking, and she's also a social worker turned nurse. And she's here with her boyfriend and all their friends. She's like, oh, you're solo? Come hang out with us. So a part of the day, you have a few hours to go explore tequila. They are buying me drinks. Oh, you're solo. We got you. They buy me drinks. I'm essentially part of their friend group now. We kind of go out to one of the cantinas and have some wings. I'm like, I got to get back because they weren't going back on the experience. They were going on their own after the train ride. So I was like, well, I got to get back. I got to catch a taxi back into town. And then I enjoy kind of the rest of the day. There's like dancing, and then you got to go to the agave fields. They show you how they cut the agave. Like it's a full, and there are some more drinks throughout the day. It's not like you're done. They give like a little water bottle that has like Jose Cuervo on it, and you get churros and some other food. And then she's like, okay, miss, it's time for you to go. And then they arranged my taxi for me to get to the Tequila Barrel Hotel. So it's nighttime at this point. Everyone else is taking the bus back because you take the train to Tequila from Guadalajara and take the bus back to Guadalajara because the Sunset people take the train. And I'm like, okay. So here I am in a tequila barrel, very tipsy, just like pass out, sleep. I take off my makeup, and that's about all I have time for and the energy to do after drinking tequila since 9 a.m. So it's definitely a fun experience. Is it for the beginner solo traveler? No, I would not say that unless you are very comfortable. Unless you are super comfortable, go for it. But I think for me at this point in my solo traveler, train traveler career, also speaking Spanish was really, really helpful. But also that gave me a shot upon arrival. I'm like, listen, I don't know if I have any more shots in me, but I will take it and go to my room. But it was really fun. And the Tequila Barrel Hotel is an amazing thing. If you even have a chance to do it while you're in Tequila, it's just so cool. Because they're like Tequila Barrel, like literally rooms in tequila barrels, full functioning showers, everything.
Well, let's stay on train rides in Spanish-speaking countries. I also have to ask you about Peru. Now, I have taken the train in Peru from the Sacred Valley to Aguascalientes in sort of the base of Machu Picchu area. I want to ask you about where you took the train in Peru, what your experience was like, and just explain, maybe for people that their only association with train travel is more of like that, standard kind of commuter train. Explain about the scenic trains and the windows and the roof of the train and the observation cars. Like, just describe what it's like and then what you saw and experienced in Peru.
Yes, Peru, I think, has some of the best trains that I've been on in this hemisphere. But I also took the Vistadome train. So I did the 1-day Machu Picchu hike. So I took that same Agua Calientes train, and then I upgraded to the Vistadome on the Peru Rail one on the way back. But they're gorgeous windows. They're very clear. Peru's also interesting because they give you dancing, music, and a fashion show on their trains. They have like entertainment on lock. I have have never been on a train that has had that much entertainment. So that was kind of the precursor to the one I changed my entire Peru trip to take the Peru Rail Titicaca train to go from Cusco to Puno, Peru, which Puno is the closest city to Lake Titicaca on the Peruvian side. So I got up and it was, I think, $275 for a 10-hour train. It included a 3-course lunch, which was incredible. Had a glass of wine. You could buy breakfast on the train because it is a bit early. I was solo again, so I had my own little table though on Amtrak. You know how you might have to share. It was like just me in the back, my little white tablecloth and everything like that. And then the views were gorgeous. I mean, you're like going to like essentially a lot of Peru that you probably wouldn't see if you just stayed in Cusco or Lima. You're going through a bunch of other areas. That was really beautiful to see. It kind of reminded me of another train ride I did in Mexico, the El Chepe Express in northern Mexico. That is part of Mexico you don't normally see, like big hills, stuff that we don't really think of based on the images that we get in the U.S. about these countries. So it was really beautiful just to see a bit more of the local life outside of the big places. And then also on the back of the train, they have, and the one in Mexico had this too, like a terrace where you actually got some fresh air. You were on the train, but also you can be back there and just sit back, relax. Obviously, I'm an influencer. So I took photos and videos as well when I was back there. I had to get my content, but they also had a pisco sour making class, or demonstration, which is really cool. And again, overachiever. I'm always going to volunteer because I thought you were able to drink the drink, and I was correct. I volunteered to shake the pisco sour drink, and my arm hurt, but it was good. It was worth it because he gave it to me at the end of the demonstration. But there was 3 dance breaks. There was a fashion show. There was music. It was a full cultural thing, and it was timed out really well. When we weren't eating, we were dancing. We weren't dancing, we were relaxing. And then we had afternoon tea right before you get off, little snacks with tea. It was just so cute. Such a well thought out experience. And for the price, honestly, really, really good.
One of the most amazing things about travel is the culinary discoveries that you find when you go to places. I literally didn't know what a pisco sour was before I went to Peru. And now when I'm in Peru, I drink nothing but pisco sours every night, all night. It's lomo saltado, ceviche, and pisco sours every night. And it is just unbelievable. And I feel like you learn about this stuff when you go to these places. I mean, that's for me one of the absolute highlights of going to these places. Now, another thing I have to ask you about in Peru is the Rainbow Mountain hike. Now, I have a little bit of a story about this. I should probably preface this, which is why I want to ask you about it. I was in Peru for about a month, and I was literally the organizer of a trip to go to hike the Rainbow Mountain. Now, I had more and more people just kept joining on to this trip. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go. My friend's coming into town. I got 3 friends coming and they want to join. We literally got up to 17 people. Sojourner, I book a trip. I do all the logistics. I'm coordinating with the guide. I'm doing a thing. 17 people to hike the Rainbow Mountain. And then what happens? I have the most outrageous series of consecutive travel mishaps of my entire travel life.
Oh no.
And in a 3-day period, I am unable to get from Lima to Cusco, which for people that don't know is literally like a 60-minute direct flight. I'm not able to get there in 3 days. And so the other 16 people end up hiking the Rainbow Mountain without me because I didn't make it there until the evening when they got back from the Rainbow Mountain hike. So I have organized a Rainbow Mountain hike. I just haven't actually done the Rainbow Mountain hike. So for people, though, that have never heard of the Rainbow Mountain, because again, this was something that I discovered when I went to Peru and I wasn't really aware of before that. Can you describe what it is? And then what was your experience like?
Okay, listen, I did Rainbow Mountain. Okay. And I'm going to preface what I'm saying. It is a beautiful experience. It is a beautiful experience. You could not pay me to ever hike Rainbow Mountain again. I just want that.
I heard it was hard.
It whooped my ass. I have never been beaten by a hill or a mountain like Rainbow Mountain. So for context, it was my last hike. So I had hiked Machu Picchu. I did like the 1-day hike. It was like 8 hours, whatever. I had been in Peru for over a week at that point. And everyone is like, oh, if you're there for a week, you're fine with the altitude, whatever. I had no sickness before this. I was drinking the cocoa leaf tea. I was doing all the things. That mountain did not care. It was cool though, because I found on Airbnb experiences an ATV ride. So instead of taking a van, I drove ATV with a bunch of other people who I didn't know, but we're all on the same tour. So that was pretty cool. And they were saying, oh, it's cold. I'm like, I'm from Wisconsin. Define cold. It's not going to be that cold to me. And it really wasn't. But man, and they had the option to take the motorcycle up. And I'm like, no, I came all this way. My self-righteousness, I'm like, I'm going to hike it. Listen, I could have tumbled down and I would have been happy and be like, okay, that's it. That's all I'm seeing. That altitude on Rainbow Mountain was something serious and I was not prepared. For some reason, I hadn't packed a whole lot of snacks and water, which I don't know why I didn't, but I had a little bit of things. A handful of us hiked it. It took me forever. That man, I think that's a video that actually popped off on Instagram and stuff because I had a video of the man holding my arm, taking me up because I was ready to tumble right back down. And no shame. I would have been just fine. Listen, I did what I could.
Yeah, and folks can do Google image searches online just to see what this looks like and see some pictures of what we're talking about if they've never seen it. Well, Sojourner, I also want to ask you about some places that you have been that I have not yet been that are super high on my list. One of them is Guatemala. I want to ask about your experience in Guatemala overall, but I especially want to ask about something that I learned about from you and from going through your content, which was that you hiked a volcano and then there was a pizza experience. Can you explain this, please, for folks?
Again, shout out to TikTok, because this is also where I found this. But yeah, so I went to Guatemala. Again, it actually, as someone who studied Spanish, I actually didn't know a lot of Guatemalan history. I learned a lot about Peru and Colombia and Mexico, but Guatemala wasn't a place that I knew a whole lot about. I had seen Machu Picchu, like I had dreamed of going to those places. I'm like, Guatemala had come up on my TikTok and Instagram feed quite a bit. So I did some research. And that was actually my first big hiking trip. I did Volcano Acatenango first, and I was the last person to get up there because that was my first time ever hiking altitude. But it was the most gorgeous clouds I've ever seen, the most gorgeous view. That was about 6 hours up. But the pizza one, I went like 2 days later. So I'm still like healing from this other hike, but I was like, I have to do all of them while I'm here. So I did this one. And it was just me on this hike. So it ended up being a personal hike, but me and the guide. And again, it was only like an hour and a half. It wasn't too bad. It was very tame. It was not the one like in Peru. It was very tame. The altitude was not nearly as bad because it's not super high. Essentially, you hike Volcano Pacaya, but you don't go all the way up. You kind of go across it almost. And then there's a bunch of volcano dogs, what they call them, like a bunch of stray dogs. I got like hot chocolate on the way up, that good Guatemalan chocolate. And you get there and it's a chef and all his employees and they make you a pizza. Literally on the volcano, this man made me a pizza. It's Pizza Pacaya de David, I believe on Instagram is still his name. But it's called Pizza Pacaya, and he made it. And it was the wildest thing because they just had all the toppings there. They're like, do you want meat? Do you want veggies? I'm like, I feel like I got to try all of it because when else am I going to eat volcano pizza? And I sit there and I'm like, can I take a photo in front of it? I need proof. Like, this is not some people going to believe that I did. I need proof that I did this thing. And I took a little photo shoot while the pizza's cooking. And that pizza was so good. They give you a little beer to go with it. He like sits you down on some rocks. They kind of have like a little table of rocks set out for you. And he serves you the pizza. But it was amazing. It was just like, when else am I going to have a chance to do this? To this day, I'm so glad I did that because I'm going to tell my nieces and nephews, your TT was outside, okay? It was great. I highly recommend visiting Guatemala. I think as someone who has learned a lot about a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, it was probably the most interesting to me because I didn't know a lot about it. And I learned a lot about, especially like someone who I didn't grow up outdoorsy. I know it sounds like I did. I did not. I was not an outdoorsy girl. This was a travel thing, how travel gets you out your comfort zone. So I think Guatemala shaped how I wanted to hike in Peru and all these other places later.
Well, another Spanish-speaking country that I have not yet been to, super high on my list that I want to ask you about, is Panama. Can you share a little bit about your experience there and what some of your highlights were from Panama?
Panama was a flight deal city. I got a flight deal email out of Milwaukee. I'm like, $300 round trip. That sounds nice. So I went for Labor Day a few years ago. So it wasn't like a really long trip, but it was really cool because Panama is a place where I hear a lot of like Americans really like, because Panama and Colombia, they have a higher population of Black folks, or like Afro-Panamanians or Afro-Colombians, just like kind of in general. And so I was really interested to see what Panama City was like. It was like a city. It was a regular city. I did a food tour while I was there. I didn't go to any of the beaches. So I would go back to Panama. I think they also have like a volcano hike there too that I wasn't able to do, but I was primarily in the city. I just hung out in the city, hung out at the markets. I did learn just how much they are getting gentrified. I feel like that was one thing that was kind of consistent amongst a lot of these places, was how they're changing. So I learned a lot about that while I was there, but really it was about eating the food. I think Selena had like a salsa class on the rooftop. So I did one of those because why not? So it was a very chill trip, but like a very nice trip to have. And I also did the Monkey Island. You kind of go and you kind of spot the monkeys, and like we fed the monkeys, and I did a tour of the indigenous village that was there too and learned about them. It had some of the best fish of my life. I don't know what she put on it. I don't think she put anything on it for real. I think it was just how the fish tastes, and she put some pineapple on it, and it was delicious. Definitely a fun place.
Well, I also want to ask about some of your travels to the continent. You talked about your Morocco experience. I now want to ask you about your Kenya experience. Nairobi is one of my all-time favorite cities. I have been a couple times. I've spent multiple months there. Absolutely love it. But can you share the context in which you went to Kenya and then what your experience was like?
I'm going to say this out loud, and I still don't believe it to be true, even though I've gone on the trip already, but I won a trip to Kenya, essentially. This time last year, actually, I submitted an application for the BIPOC mentorship trip for travel digital storytellers through Intrepid Travel and Nomadness Travel Tribe, two really big names in the travel industry. And I submitted a video that was, what does it mean to be a conscious traveler? You can watch it on YouTube. I made it public. At the time, I was like, I don't want my head to know, I'm scared. But now, obviously, it's lean into that. But I won a spot on the trip. And at the time, I had no idea where we were going. I just know I won. I will be recognized at Nomadness Fest last year, which is really cool. And I won $5,000 for my business as Sojournings, which was obviously an amazing thing to be a small business as someone who is balancing a 9-to-5 to have that kind of investment. And I had no idea where we were going. I know I'm going on this trip sometime in the spring, had no idea when. I get an email in March saying, hey, y'all, we're going to Kenya in April. And my jaw dropped. I'm like, they are playing with me. There is no way you're paying for me to go to Kenya. That's not a cheap trip. I was in shock. I was in shock till I got there. I don't think I was in shock until I left. Like then, okay, yeah, that was real. That honestly, because those kind of things just don't happen like often. So it was amazing to be around a bunch of Black and Brown storytellers. I was a mentee. They're really great mentors on the trip. I think Gabby's been on your podcast before. Gabby was one of the mentors. Anella, who's Feed the Malik, is also an incredible video creator and Black travel food creator. And then Glenn, who does a lot of work like Black Girls Texting and Craft and Release, really a great storyteller. So it was just an honor to be around them as mentors, but then also be with a bunch of the mentees. And we were from all across the world, honestly. And some of us were specialized in like video transitions, or someone specialized in adventure, outdoorsy things. So we were all had different areas, and we were coming together to learn for a week, to be on safari, on some of the most incredible safari experience I can only dream of. Yeah, it still doesn't feel like it happened this year, but it happened. It happened in April, and just going on safari in Kenya is just not something that most folks do. And then as our tour guides told us, we were the first group of primarily Black and brown people they've ever had. And they had been tour guides for years. So also seeing us, they were just like, it's different having y'all. And I asked them, and that was the focus of a video that I made of like, what does it mean to have Black Americans come back to the continent? Granted, a lot of us, our history isn't necessarily Kenyan history, just given how the Middle Passage was. It's more West Africa. But I think just being on the continent and seeing other folks and learning from other folks, learning from women who are pillars in their communities, doing a lot of work there. And then also just learning from the tour guides. They are so knowledgeable about all the wildlife. Masai Mara, incredible, unreal. I vlogged the whole trip, and there was also a point where it was like a lot of flooding. And so we didn't know if we would get out of Masai Mara either. So like it had all the good elements of a trip, a little excitement, a little, danger, but, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, a lot of really great food. And yeah, it still feels unreal. I'm not going to lie. Like, it still feels like that wasn't a thing that happened, but it absolutely happened.
Yeah. Shout out to Gabby Beckford. She has been on the podcast. We'll link that one up in the show notes if anybody hasn't listened to that episode. Also, huge shout out to Nomadness Travel Tribe. Avita Robinson, of course, has been on the podcast, and a bunch of other Nomadness Travel Tribe folks have, of course, been on the podcast. So that's amazing. I also want to ask you about your experience in South Africa. We started off talking about the wine experience, but I want to ask about the broader experience. Cape Town, Johannesburg. What was your take on South Africa? How was that experience for you?
It was interesting because a lot of people asked me like, well, why are you going to Johannesburg? Just go hang out in Cape Town. But I'm like, well, no, because I feel like I got to see both on my first trip. I got to experience both. And I'm so glad I did, because it provided a lot of context.
Yes.
Or like South Africa, my sister and I went with one of our friends. Johannesburg, it was one of the first places I've been to where I didn't see hardly any white people, which was a rare thing to see. I was like, oh, it really is all Black folks here. So that was one of the things me and her were like, oh, it's just us. That's wild to actually see. Coming from obviously seeing it in my neighborhood, but not the entire city itself. So seeing that was really dope. But then also learning a lot about the history. We went to Soweto, we went to Apartheid Museum, and then we went to like Mandela's house. And we also went to the Hector Museum, which was a story I had no idea was a thing, that talks about the uprisings in that area. And it was just felt so familiar, but in a sad way too, seeing their history and how it really reminded me of the stories that my grandparents told about Jim Crow and like the civil rights. And there were so many parallels too. And then going to Cape Town, oh, this is a touristy city. It was night and day compared to Johannesburg. I think where we're staying, our tour guides are like, you're kind of in a aggressive area. Like, are y'all safe over there? And people were telling us not to walk around at night, all this kind of stuff. And again, we from like Milwaukee, my other friends from New York. So we're just, how dangerous is it? It's kind of like relative, right? But I think it was still cool because we got to learn so much about the place. And also from our Uber drivers too, they were all super interested in us being Black Americans and visiting and all of that kind of dynamic too, because our histories are just very similar. And so just hearing them was also, it's a unique story for each of us in our own way, but still almost a connected story in how our histories are. And then going to Cape Town felt a lot more touristy, but also put into context having the Johannesburg context made Cape Town make more sense. Of this is why Cape Town is like this, the history of Nelson Mandela. We went to Robben Island and everything. And so that was a huge thing for us, was getting the cultural historical part from Johannesburg and seeing that dynamic play out and how the history we heard about and how that shaped what we saw in Cape Town, because there weren't a lot of Black folks who were tourists when we got there. It was like night and day. We were staying in Camps Bay, which is the more expensive part. We had more space and everything. We went to Table Mountain. So we did all the touristy things, but I think they balance each other out because I felt like we got more of a historical cultural context in Johannesburg, and I would love to go back to Cape Town to kind of do something similar.
Did you get to go to any of the townships in Cape Town? Like, did you go to Khayelitsha Township? Did you go to the Rands Party? Did you do any of that kind of stuff?
No, we didn't go to any of the townships, but I knew of the Khayelitsha one because my internship in Germany, she also had a program in that township. So I'd heard about it, but we did not go.
Yeah, totally important experience and a very different vibe from what you're describing. But I think it's a really important distinction that you're making in terms of Cape Town, meaning particularly the part out by the waterfront and that whole kind of tourist realm, and how confronting the legacy of apartheid is and European colonialism is and stuff. And that kind of meshes with the tourism dynamic, but also just kind of the legacy of colonialism and stuff that's very apparent there in terms of apartheid, in terms of the racial dynamics and stuff like that. And then you go to Joburg and it's like a whole different type of vibe, like really fundamentally different type of vibe.
Yeah, interesting too, because as we were coming in, because obviously I've seen Black Panther, I could also see the inspiration for some things I've seen in media that have taken real places and kind of made them into forms of media too, which is also interesting to see in real life. And I think to your point about the colonialism, I think one thing we noticed too was that most of the Black people we saw or that we were around in Cape Town, so obviously we went to the touristy spots because we're tourists, but a lot of folks we saw were also like serving us, which I feel like also kind of made us feel like, okay, this is a bit different from Johannesburg. So yeah, it was an interesting dynamic. And then what I did love though was seeing the street style, because African street style, no matter where you are on the continent, is its own lane of amazing. And I saw that and I'm like, oh, this is the creativity, and I think that was the part of Joburg I also love, was seeing the creativity of the young folks who were there. We went to, I think it's called the Playhouse. And so we had drinks there, like we saw the music, the young vibe. Yeah, there was so much going on between both cities. And it's like, I definitely want to go back to both of them. I feel like I missed stuff even still, because 10 days is just not enough to really get the vibe for a place.
What was your experience or sort of personal reflection? And it sounds like you went there with some friends and stuff. As someone from the African diaspora going to the continent, what was that particular dynamic like, connecting with the continent in a place like South Africa or a place like Kenya as someone from the diaspora?
To our earlier point about examining my privileges and whatnot, I have so many questions for other folks about how, Black Americans are perceived, just because I think, obviously, again, having the privilege of the U.S. dollar is a thing. So like financially, we can do things that other folks in country can't, which I think is something I'm always thinking about being a tourist, and how the experiences I have aren't the experiences that people in the country are able to have, which can also be said for the U.S., but I feel it more when I'm abroad. But I personally am always interested in diaspora. I think I'm always interested in asking questions. Okay, I'm a learner at heart. I'm a curious person at heart. And so if I had the opportunity to talk to people, I will. I feel like I talked to a few more people in Kenya, like some people, like obviously our guides, asked them, what it meant for them to see Black folks even traveling to the continent. Because again, any part of Africa is not cheap to get to. It's expensive. And I feel like people assume, like you're American, you have money. Well, not that much. That flight alone is a lot to save up for. And so I think for me, I would love to travel the continent more. That's a dream of mine, is just to spend some more time. So I feel like each place is different. Like South Africa and Kenya are two very different countries. So I think you learn more about their differences when you're there. And I was able to talk to one of the women we met in Kenya. Because like she said, well, not everyone knows that there are even Black folks in the U.S. They don't understand how migration has worked, how we got over there to begin with. And so she said it's good too for other folks to see it because people only see what they see on social media, and so that's not always the best depiction. And I think I've also run into that, not necessarily on the continent, but understanding what you see on social media is not all Black Americans. Like, it's not all just like what we see of you all on our televisions is not the same either. And so being able to have those conversations, I think on the continent is really beautiful because that's what Pan-Africanism is all about. And that's also what a lot of our ancestors fought for in the U.S. It wasn't us for just to be isolated in getting our rights and our freedoms. It was also about other folks being able to get it too. And just talking to folks in their countries and hearing their stories and their experiences, I think is always a good perspective to have, just because it's not a narrative I can get as easily over here, even though TikTok has really helped with that. But, it's always nice to have somebody in person to talk to.
Well, I want to ask you at this point in your travel journey, as well as your academic studies and your professional career and everything else, I want to ask you about your travel lens and why it is so important to you to pay attention to the social and economic and political environments and the places where you travel, and maybe any tips you have for how we can all better reflect and understand our positionality and our social location vis-a-vis the world as we move through it, and why that is important.
I think it's important because nothing happens in a vacuum. Even as you spoke about earlier, like my name, right? My name has a historical context to it. There's something to be said about it. I think slightly because of that and because how like my parents talked about history and like knowing your history and the people who came before you, I also take that into travel. And I think it's important because places have like people in them. They're not just vacation spots. Like there are people who live there. There are people who are there like all year round. This is their home. That's their grocery store. That's where they work. And so I think for me, it's always to be conscious of it's not really our playground. I think I hear that a lot in the travel space of like, the world's your playground. Is it a playground? I don't know if that's the right terminology for it because there are people who are existing every single day, even when you leave in that place. Because travel can be really great, but also travel is selfish in a lot of ways. And I think people really get caught up in that of I want a vacation, main character syndrome, all these things that kind of pop up in the lexicon and whatnot. And it's really important to know the history of places we're going to. And it's hard to be a perfect traveler. I don't think that's a thing. And I'm not saying that people need to be a perfect traveler all the time because tourism is an imperfect system. I think there's a lot that needs to be done in the tourism industry to have more equity in how locals are being treated and where the money's actually going to. So if you like care about that and you're interested in that, I would say as much as possible, try to support local businesses. I will say it is a bit hard, even as someone who travels a lot, because some places you like choose out of convenience because you know what to expect. Or sometimes you choose things because of, oh, well, it makes sense to be over here than over there. But I think supporting local as much as possible. I think it's unrealistic to think that tourists will learn a language before they visit a place personally. But I do think learning some phrases like please and thank you and you're welcome, like the basic ones is really important. If not, download. Okay, it's 2024. We have apps. Google Translate has come a long way since I used it in 2015. You can translate whole restaurant menus nowadays. So I think also using our resources that are available to us to not demand that folks speak English. I think that's a pet peeve of mine. I've heard it a few times when I'm traveling, not thinking folks should automatically speak to us in English, trying to see how we can better communicate. I think people also underestimate body language. I've used body language to communicate more times than I could count. So I think being a bit creative in how we think about travel in the sense of not necessarily it's about us experiencing things all the time, but it is kind of an imbalance, but also thinking about, okay, what can I offer or what can I also do to kind of support and have more nuance in the experience that I'm having. So I think it's easy to say, well, everyone can travel. Good job, travel the world. That's not true for most people. That's just not a thing. And so just being conscious of the way we talk about travel, because I think it's really easy, even if you're not traveling, to get caught up in some of the elitist mentality and like the elitist language. I'm talking to anybody who like doesn't have a passport. Well, that's not fair. So I think there are some things in the travel language and the way we talk about places. Try not to use the word destination, but it's really hard, like to figure it out how to talk about places so they're a bit more humanized and not more for just leisure. Thinking about who's there, what's their history. I believe you can have some fun and learn some history in the same trip. I don't think they have to be separate from each other. Maybe during the day you go on some tours and then that night you go out and see nightlife. I think that's fine, but finding balance in that too is also really important, just because we want to have like a holistic perspective of places, not just saying I go there to party. So I think there is some balance to be found.
Sojourner, when you think back over the past decade about all of these travel experiences that you've had, how do you think all of this travel has impacted you as a person?
Ooh, I think one, I've come out of my shell a lot being a solo traveler. I think I built a lot of confidence because there's something about navigating a place where you do not speak the language that makes you feel like you can do anything. I feel like it's changed me a lot in that regard of being more open and just being more social too. Again, I was a bit shy and you had to pull stuff out of me if you were a stranger. And now I'm just like, hey, I'm Sojourner. Like now it's a bit more forthcoming. So I would definitely say confidence and like outgoingness. I was very much an introvert when I was a kid. Now I'm definitely more of an extrovert in general. I think also too, just being a Black woman is maybe more conscious of all being specific. I'm a Black woman, but also if someone asks me, I'm a Black U.S. American woman. I think all those things are also important in naming that, because again, that shows my social location. That makes a difference, because even if I'm a Black woman from the U.S., a Black woman from a country in the global South will have a completely different experience than me. You know, it's definitely possible. And so just understanding the variety and the depth and breadth of Blackness and what that actually means is also a very big learning experience, but it's very beautiful to kind of have that understanding. And then I think a third thing that, like, as far as travel changing me, it really has widened my perspective. I joked that I was a Black girl overachiever because I thought, like, to be successful, you go get a PhD, you go stay in school. I come from a family of educators, you know, and so it was like, that's kind of what I thought success looked like or freedom looked like. And I felt like now I kind of have created my own version of that. And so that's been really wonderful to kind of create my own lane. A remote social worker, never thought that was going to be a thing. Didn't know that was a thing. Fulbright really overestimated my ability. I was like, I don't know, but it turned out right. So I think it's just made me a more curious person. I feel like people talk about like being delusional, but I think the prerequisite is being curious enough to be delusional, to apply for a very prestigious program that you had no idea had a very slim chance of winning, but doing it anyway, you know? And so it's really just following that curiosity and like understanding that it may not make sense on paper. You may see my resume and be like, girl, how did you get from there to here to do that, to be talking about this and riding trains? Like, this don't make no sense. But I think travel has shown me most things actually don't make sense, and it doesn't matter what you do. Just go live your life and try to figure it out is the way you go. So yeah, also a subplot is that my geospatial awareness has also been increased by a lot due to travel, and I can navigate places a lot easier than I think I used to.
Well, you have been traveling the world now for a decade. Why are you so passionate about continuing to travel? What does travel mean to you today?
I think I'm passionate because I've seen that it can change you for the better. I think there are obviously lots of ways to get perspective and change. You don't necessarily have to leave your home to do it, but there's just something about traveling. I wish it was more accessible. I'm passionate about finding ways to make it more accessible. I think one of my dreams is to send folks on train trips, because even though I love them, they are not the cheapest experiences to have, you know? And so figuring out ways to make travel accessible, or even one day I hope to apply my social work research skills in the travel space to talk about like social impact and sustainability. I think that would be a cool way to apply skills that I got and whatnot. So I think It's still, I guess, a very social worky way of looking through travel, but I think that's really what keeps me going. I want my niece to be able to have travel experiences that maybe aren't necessarily as bound by having $4,000 for a 2-week trip if she decides to go to college. So I think the accessibility part and figuring out how to make this more accessible so other folks can experience the joy that I have. They may not like it, but they can try it to know that they don't like it. I think we underestimate trying things just because we're curious and just because we can, because that's actually a privilege that a lot of people don't have. And so what are the ways to make this more accessible to other folks, and how do we do that? Obviously by sharing tips and helping them plan trips, but what are other more deeper ways? I think is a question I always have of figuring out how can I use what I've learned and what I know and the connections I have and the platform that I've grown to kind of help other people experience these things too. So that's where I would like to be headed in the future for sure.
Well, I think that is an amazing place to end the main portion of this interview. And at this point, Sojourner, are you ready to move in to the lightning round?
I love a good lightning round. I have some wine left, so yes.
Let's do it.
The lightning round.
All right. What is one book that you would recommend that people should read?
I have two. One is like a fun book. It's called Love Radio. I love young Black YA books. They're so cute. Like, it's a cute little read. So Love Radio, I'm almost done with it. It's super cute, easy to read, nice escapism. If you don't want to travel, just pick up a book. But also Beyond the Shores, A History of African Americans Abroad by Tamara J. Walker. I started reading this to learn about Black Americans living abroad and the history of that. And it's been really interesting. So if you're interested in Black travel plus history, I recommend this one.
All right. Who is one person currently alive today that you've never met that you'd most love to have dinner with, just you and that person for an evening of dinner and conversation?
Because she's the Black travel OG, Onika the Traveler, I have not met her yet. And I would love to have dinner with her because she was pretty much the first Black woman I saw traveling on the internet. And I was like, what is she doing? And, she was a teacher before she became a travel journalist, on camera, Emmy winning, everything. So I would love to have a one-on-one with her.
All right. Sojourner, knowing everything that you know now, if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your 18-year-old self, what would you say to 18-year-old Sojourner?
Do not take out them student loans. Do not do that. Apply to more scholarships. There's more free money out here because them going to come back to bite you in the ass later.
All right. Sojourner, of all of the places that you have now traveled, what are 3 of your favorite destinations you would most recommend that other people should definitely check out?
I love Cartagena, Colombia. I really love Cartagena and Palenque, which is the first free Black town in America. So definitely Cartagena. A safari in Kenya. I feel like Masai Mara. If you're going to go on safari, that's the one you should go on. A third place, I have to throw in the Tequila train because it's just one of those things. It's unique. It's not something that you may be inclined to do, but I guess that's technically 2 places, Guadalajara to Tequila. But yeah, I take the Jose Cuervo Express train.
All right. Sojourner, last question. What are 3 of your bucket list destinations or experiences that you have not yet done, highest on your list, you'd most love to see?
I really want to go to Thailand and Vietnam. And there's tons of trains, but as far as the countries, I would say also Senegal. I really want to go to Dakar to visit Senegal. So I'll do 3 countries.
I love those picks. Those are actually 3 of my favorite countries. I've been to Dakar 3 times. I've spent 3 months there. It is a spectacular, magical city. Those are amazing picks. So hit me up when you are ready to plan those trips, and I got tips for you. All right, Sojourner, at this point, I want you to let folks know how they can find you, how they can follow you, how they can check out your amazing content. How do you want people to come into your world?
Well, I joke that I have an irresponsible digital footprint. So you can find me anywhere here on social media. So on Instagram at The Sojourner, Sojourneys. But on everything else, I'm pretty sure it's just Sojourneys. But if you put in Sojourneys or Sojourner White, I promise you I'm the only person that will pop up across all platforms. But YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, if you really want to connect with me that way too. I know that's becoming a bigger platform. I'm kind of everywhere. And if you want like one-on-one help, you can email me and we can chit chat.
All right. We're going to link all of that up in the show notes. So you can just go to one place at themaverickshow.com. Go to the show notes for this episode. There you're going to find direct links to all of the things that we have discussed in this episode, including all of the ways to find, follow, and connect with Sojourner. This was such a wonderful conversation, such a special evening and wine night. Sojourner, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Good night, everybody.